This afternoon, we will confess to a litany of sins. We will beat our breast as we repeat an alphabet of woe. In a contemporary rendering of failures, we will confess to succumbing in silence to social pressure and for acquiescing in beliefs we find offensive. We will confess to permitting social inequalities to prevail and for lacking the vision to transcend our selfishness. We will confess to condemning in our children the faults we tolerate in ourselves, and for tolerating in ourselves the faults we condemn in our parents. We learn how to be parents from our parents. If we are fortunate, our parents taught us many wonderful things and instilled in us values that we would wish to pass down to our own children. The value of work and education, helping to make the world a better one. And there might be some things that we learned from our parents that we wish to shed. Occasionally, we are made to stop and ask ourselves, what are our children learning from us? Are our behaviors ones we wish our children to copy? Perhaps you have been in your car when another driver has cut you off. I know that never happens in New Jersey. And you may have uttered a word or two that you would not use in polite company. And then you realize your 2-year-old is in the car and has just heard what you have said, and now they are gleefully repeating those very words. I remember when the boys were little, Colin and I would take them into New York. We took the train, and on one occasion we were making our way through Penn Station. Lev must have been 5 or 6 at the time, and he could not help but notice a man sitting on the floor asking for money. Lev was very upset about this, and we explained to him that some people did not have homes or jobs. He was adamant that we give the man money, and so I gave Lev $1 to give to the man. We continued on our way, and no sooner did we encounter another person asking for some change. And again, Lev asked if we could help that man out. It soon became apparent that if we continued on this way, we would not get far, and I would run out of money. But what was the lesson I wanted to teach Lev about how we care for those who are less fortunate? Of course, I wanted to teach by example and to raise my sons to be good people. But was that enough? I also wanted my children to be kind and courageous. Beyond being good, I wanted them to be pro-justice. I did not want my children to be the bystanders. I wanted them to be upstanders. I hope that you want the same for your children. If your child is in a jam, I don't want my child to be a bystander. I want them to stand up for your child. And I want your child to do the same for mine. To put it another way, I want our children to learn to be allies. We have heard that word a lot lately. An ally is a person who stands up for a person or group that is being targeted or discriminated against. It involves making space for those who are different from us, those who at the moment are being marginalized. It is humanizing the experience of others and using our power and privilege to create equity for others. In the last few years, the marginalization of people because of their race has preoccupied us. From Breonna Taylor to George Floyd, to Black Lives Matter and the debate over critical race theory, We cannot pretend that racism in our nation does not exist. I know that this is hard to talk about, but I also know that we need to talk about it. At Temple Emanu-El, we have already had impactful conversations and presentations by Brian Stephenson and Isabel Wilkerson. Next month, 30 of us will travel to Alabama and Georgia on a civil rights journey. I know that none of us wants to raise children who are racist, and those of you who are grandparents would shudder at the thought of your grandchildren being considered racist. But that is not enough. In his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi explains that being not racist is not enough. The opposite of racist is simply that they're not racist. It's anti-racist, he writes. Being an anti-racist is not exactly a new idea. In fact, it goes back to the abolitionist movement. It wasn't enough not just to own people, one had to fight against the very institution of slavery. So what does being an anti-racist look like for us today? We can begin by unpacking our own experiences with race and privilege. And again, I know it is uncomfortable to think that we have anything to do with perpetuating racism in our country. After all, we had nothing to do with the creation of systems that have held certain people back from advancing. And of course, we treat others with respect and fairness. But allow me to remind you of what we often say about the Holocaust. There were no innocent bystanders. If we are a bystander, we are complicit. What were the conversations you had with your own parents about race when you were growing up? What were the conversations you have with your children and grandchildren about race? It may not be something you ever talk about, but I assure you that black people spend plenty of time discussing race. If it is one of the most important conversations taking place right now, shouldn't we be talking about race with our children and grandchildren? Being an anti-racist means challenging our own ways of thinking and behaving. We all have implicit biases. These are biases that occur automatically and unintentionally. It's the way our brains work, often using stereotypes that we do not even subscribe to in an attempt to organize information. For example, do we find ourselves crossing the street if a group of black teenagers are walking toward us? That's implicit bias. Being aware of our own behavior helps us overcome our own biases. It may involve changing the way we talk. For example, instead of using the word slaves, we might say enslaved people. I know that sounds cumbersome, but it is a way of reminding ourselves that they were people too, just like us. We can read books by black authors, watch movies made by black filmmakers with black casts. And while popular culture has a long way to go before people of color and other marginalized groups are more fully represented, I assure you it's not too difficult. Right now there are no less than 10 Broadway productions featuring black stories and black actors. Go into your children's or grandchildren's rooms. Do they have any books written by black authors or about black people? What are the movies they watch? What are the toys they play with? Are any of their dolls black? A search on Amazon of children's books about black people will produce over 3,000 results. When you return home today, check and see if the bookshelves of your children contain any such books. And while you are at it, you might take a look at your own bookshelves and your own reading lists. Being anti-racist means engaging in acts of social justice. It means showing our children how we respond to injustice. It means volunteering, writing letters and signing petitions. And it means going to a rally or a march, like the Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian hate rallies that we have had right here in Westfield and in neighboring towns. Being an anti-racist means modeling all of these things for our children. And I will be honest with you, this work is not easy. It is not done overnight, and we will make mistakes. But it adds up. What might happen if our children read such classic books as Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson, or The Watsons Go to Birmingham by Christopher Paul Curtis? What might happen if you asked Alexa to play Spotify's playlist, Black Voices in Family Music? Well, our children might just move beyond the implicit bias and play with a black or brown child on the playground, or sit with a child of color in the cafeteria. When they hear a racist remark or joke, they might then challenge it. They may make friends with someone who does not look like them. A 2014 Harvard study reported that 80% of children thought their parents valued achievement and happiness over being caring and kind people. I'll let that sink in. Of course, we want our children to be successful and happy. But I want us to want our children and grandchildren to be compassionate and kind to the same degree. When our children see others suffering, I want them to be motivated to do something. I want our children and grandchildren to go about the world with their eyes and their hearts open. I don't want them to be bystanders. I want them to be upstanders. This morning at Kulanu, our intergenerational service, we prayed these words. We will not stand with our feet frozen to the ground and our arms limp by our sides. We will not stay silent when our voice is needed. We will not hide. We will not walk away. This is what I want for our children, and I pray that none of us uttered those words in vain this morning. When reciting our sins, we will ask, who among us is blameless? Let's face it, we can all do better, we can all do more. There are some things that we may not be able to teach our children. Calculus and physics may be beyond some of our abilities to teach. But this we can do. We can all raise anti-racist children and grandchildren. According to the Talmud, a parent is required to teach their children 3 things. We are to teach our children Torah, a trade, and how to swim. Of course, teaching our children our sacred texts and how to support themselves makes sense. But how to swim? It is often understood that this is so they will not drown. Rather, we teach our children how to swim so that they can save someone else from drowning.